Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, let me commend my colleague, the member for Ottawa Centre and the official opposition foreign affairs critic, on what was a clear and forceful speech this morning outlining the NDP position on the motion before the House on the government's intention to expand the combat mission in Iraq to Syria and nominally add another year to the mission. Also, I want to commend my other colleagues who have spoken in the debate thus far. I also want to acknowledge the appalling and abhorrent abuses and atrocities committed in Iraq and elsewhere by this vicious group known variously as ISIS, ISIL, or Daesh. Mass killings, sexual violence, slavery, forced displacement, the destruction of holy and historic sites. In Iraq alone, the violence has led to the displacement of 2.5 million civilians and left 5.2 million in need of humanitarian assistance. They claim, Mr. Speaker, an old goal of parts of Islam, one which was even promoted in the Middle East by the West for its own purposes 100 years ago, the establishment of a caliphate. Their methods are brutal, and they are opposed by the rest of Islam. They are fomenting and carrying out the most extreme battle between the Shiite and Shia branches of Islam, extreme intolerance to the point of death, and a radical ideology that in no way represents Islam. The current crisis has been created by ISIL in the vacuum of a governmental authority in Iraq after 10 years of military intervention by the United States and others. In response, the current international coalition of some 60 nations led by the United States is now working to deal with the threat of ISIL and the fallout of their actions. The coalition has undertaken, quote, 5 lines of effort, so-called, only one of which involves military combat. What's more, only a small minority of coalition partners are actually engaged in military combat. Canada is one. This government started last September with a 30-day mission to advise and assist the Kurdish Peshmerga in northern Iraq, then a 6-month air combat mission with the assurances of no ground combat, no painting targets, and no accompaniment of the Kurds into combat. Now the government is nominally adding another year to Canada's commitment and expanding into Syria without their consent, a condition set by the Prime Minister last fall. I continue to say nominally add another year for a very good reason, and that is that this government, through statements by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Defence, and the Prime Minister himself, have made it clear that they are headed toward a long-term military combat mission for Canada with no clear end. We will be faced with this decision as long as they are in government. The Foreign Affairs Minister, the Defence Minister, and the Prime Minister have all stated that ISIL poses a direct threat to Canada. When the Prime Minister says, quote, "We will deal with the threat to this country as long as it is there. We will not stop dealing with it before that. We know we are in this for the long haul." Because we have to look at how this government has defined the threat. The Minister of Foreign Affairs said in his speech this morning that Canadians are under siege. Under siege, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of National Defence, and the Prime Minister have repeatedly said that ISIL has declared war on Canada. This organization has declared war on Canada. And the Minister of Defence actually invoked Canada's independent right of self-defence in international law as a justification for the actions being taken by Canada. Now, these overblown statements by the most senior leaders of the Canadian government risk the credibility of Canada in the international world and the government at home, and are clearly designed to raise the level of fear among Canadian citizens. What kind of respect and reputation in foreign affairs can Canada expect with this kind of leadership on the most serious matter of state going to war in foreign countries? We do know, of course, that terrorists exist in Canada. That is not new. But neither the attacker on Parliament Hill nor in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu were sent here by any foreign entity. As pointed out in one of Canada's foremost national newspapers, the Globe and Mail, despite attempts by the Prime Minister to closely tie ISIS to the terrorist threat in Canada, the actual connections are thin to non-existent. But instead of dealing with the actual threat in Canada by engaging in a robust and well-resourced anti-radicalization and counter-radicalization programs here at home, by working with the Muslim community instead of alienating them, and by preventing the flow of funds to ISIL, confronting the dire humanitarian situation in a significant and increased manner, by doing all those things that my colleague, the member for Ottawa Centre, emphasized in his speech this morning and are contained in the NDP amendment. Instead of doing all those things, Mr. Speaker, this government is going down the road of war, from mission creep to mission leap, with no clear goals, no honesty with the House of Commons and the Canadian people, no clear end or exit strategy, with dubious legal justification and no end game. In fact, in a television appearance the other day, the Minister of Defence stated that the strategy has gone from one of containing ISIL to defeating it. And we just heard the same thing from the Parliamentary Secretary. The Minister of Foreign Affairs said something else today. But when the Minister of Defence was asked what happens in the event that Canada reaches the objective of defeating ISIL, he admitted that he'd need to look for a crystal ball. Now, that'll give you some idea about where this government thinks this is going and how it's going to lead to an actual resolve that they are proposing. The objectives keep changing depending on who is speaking, and without a clear objective, the uncertainty about this mission and its length is obvious. Neither can we trust what this government will do in the course of this military action. We found that out within the last 6 months as the mission, quote, evolved without Canadians knowing about it at the time, and evolved contrary to the express promises of the Prime Minister. But this time, he's given us a hint. On Tuesday in the House, the Prime Minister said, "We have made important deployments. These deployments could easily be changed." He also opened the door to further expansion, saying, quote, "We must avoid, if we can, taking on ground combat responsibilities in this region. We seek to have the Iraqis do this themselves." With this government's record, that's far from reassuring. Have we learned nothing from our experience, most recently in Afghanistan and Libya? Neither can be called a success. In Libya, it was relatively easy to destroy the government of Libya, although this, of course, was not the stated intention going in. It was related to the responsibility to protect. From responsibility to protect to regime change, that result was a disaster. Instability, chaos, and a vacuum into which numerous terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda and ISIL, are now free to operate. And now we're dealing with the 10-year fallout from a 10-year military intervention in Iraq. When will we acknowledge the limitations and significant potential for failure and disaster by taking this military approach again and again? Let me be clear. The NDP supports the coalition, as do 60 other nations, with only a handful of our Western allies engaged in airstrikes and none engaged as is Canada on the ground. The debate is about what role Canada should play as part of the coalition. Canada must act, but we must do so in a way that can best add value to the international coalition and in a way that respects international law and our values as a country. We cannot support the long-term, ill-defined military combat mission proposed in the motion. We have therefore amended it to conform to the important steps that Canada can and should take, both within Canada and in the region, to support those affected and to help build the long-term stability of Iraq and the entire region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for St. John's for his contribution to the debate, although I believe that his speech was filled with a number of mischaracterizations of the government's policy, and I strongly disagree with his conclusions, of course. Firstly, he characterized a small number of countries involved in the military campaign. In fact, there are 24 countries that have committed military assets to the campaign, amongst which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, are the social democratic governments of Denmark, Belgium, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, France, and other countries with military assets, including involvement in the air campaign, whose government's decisions are supported by the social democratic parties of the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand. It's a democratic administration in the United States. Parties of the center-left all through the democratic world who see an urgent security imperative and humanitarian imperative to stop this genocide, to stop the metastasization of this genocidal terrorist organization into actually becoming something resembling a state. Why does the NDP take such a radical departure from the mainstream view on international security of the center-left parties? And secondly, he says that we have no clear goal. The goal is very clear: to degrade ISIL to the point where it no longer constitutes a security threat to Canada or the world. That's what I characterize as defeating that organization. He says there's no exit strategy. Mr. Speaker, we have 600 personnel in Kuwait and 69 in Erbil. The exit strategy is very simple. When the government of Canada decides that their mission is over, they come on planes and return home. So would you please stop repeating this nonsense?
The member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it amusing that the minister likes to play with words about exit strategy. That is a well-known strategic matter that militaries should and can and do consider whenever they're engaged in battle. When they go into missions, deciding how to get out is a very important part of deciding whether to go in. As to the goal, we hear the goal differently expressed today than we heard from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, than we just heard from the Parliamentary Secretary. We don't know what the goal that this government has, and we think that this government we don't trust this government, frankly. I don't know what the other parties in other countries do with their governments, but we certainly have reason not to trust this government as to what they will do, when they will do it, how far they go, and what they will do.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Vancouver Quadra.
Mr. Speaker, I want to just ask my fellow defence critic a question about their party's position. But first I'll say that our position is not to support this motion because we don't see it being in the national interest. But the Liberal Party of Canada has never shied away from sending the Canadian Armed Forces into combat when it does serve the national interest. Now, we received a briefing yesterday, and in that briefing, Foreign Affairs was very clear that it's important that Iraq's own army become sufficient to take on ISIL on its own. And what they said is that it's becoming stronger thanks to advise and assist in training efforts by coalition partners, including Canada. Now, we agree that these efforts should be behind the wire and not at the front lines, but why would the NDP not support behind the wire, back of the front lines training that can help make the Iraqi forces stronger so that they themselves can protect their people and territory and take it back from ISIL?
Honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to have the question from the honourable member. The fact of the matter is that we've never objected to the notion of assisting the Iraqi army to train and to, in fact, transport weapons to the Iraqi army, which was done from the Czech Republic and from Albania. We supported that. That was never put to a motion in this House. What was put to a motion in this House at the end of in early October was the whole package, which we voted against. So we did have trouble, of course, getting the truth from this government during the month of September, even as to how many people were going, how many people were there. When questions were asked as to when they were going, the response was, "What do you want? The airplane schedule to know what flight they're on?" That's the kind of responses that we got, Mr. Speaker. It took about 3 weeks to find out how many were going. But we would certainly support the efforts to assist the Iraqi army. But what we ended up getting was a combat mission and combat involvement by those ground troops.
Before we go to resuming debate, just a